The last week of the year has a particular stillness to it. Streets feel quieter, houses glow longer at night, and time itself seems to slow as if waiting for something to change. In Boulder, Colorado, December 1996 arrives wrapped in snow and expectation. Christmas has just passed. New Year's Eve is approaching. Families are between celebrations, between obligations, between one year and the next. On a quiet residential street stand a large brick house at 749 15th Street. It looks safe. It looks warm. It looks like the kind of place where nothing truly bad should ever happen. The Ramseys have lived there for several years. John Ramsey is successful, confident, accustomed to control. He is the CEO of a computer company that has done extremely well, especially in recent years. He flies often, manages people, makes decisions. He is a man used to order and solutions. Patsy Ramsey brings a different presence into the house. She is former Miss West Virginia, polished, expressive, deeply invested in appearances. She cares about presentation, about holidays, about how the family is seen. She loves Christmas. She loves decorating. She loves creating moments that feel special. Together, they live a life that appears full. Busy, social, affluent. They host parties. They travel. They plan. They have 2 children. Burke, their son, is 9 years old. Quiet, reserved, often overlooked in the public imagination later, though he is very much present in the house. He plays video games. He keeps to himself. He is not the center of attention. That role belongs to JonBenét. JonBenét Ramsey is 6 years old. Blonde, small, photogenic. She has been competing in child beauty pageants since she was very young. Patsy manages her outfits, her hair, her routines. JonBenét performs confidently on stage, smiling easily under bright lights, reciting lines, wearing sequins and crowns. To some, it looks harmless. To others, unsettling. But inside the family, it is simply part of life. Something they do together. Something that brings praise and excitement. In the days after Christmas, the Ramsey house is full. Decorations remain up. Wrapping paper has been cleared away, but the glow lingers. Patsy is tired. She has been busy. There have been parties, visits, travel plans. The family is scheduled to leave early on December 26th to fly to Michigan to see relatives, then later to Charlevoix for New Year's. The night of December 25th is unremarkable. The Ramseys attend a Christmas gathering at the home of friends. JonBenét falls asleep in the car on the way home. John carries her upstairs and puts her to bed. Patsy changes her clothes. Bert goes to his room. The house settles. Nothing feels urgent. Nothing feels wrong. Later, Patsy will say she stayed up for a while, tidying, packing, thinking ahead to the morning flight. She does not change out of the clothes she wore that night. Something that will later be noticed, scrutinized, interpreted. Sometime during the night, something happens inside that house. What exactly happens will never be known with certainty. What is known begins in the early hours of December 26th, when Patsy Ramsey comes downstairs and finds a note on the back staircase leading from the kitchen. It is not a short note. It is not hastily written. It is nearly 3 pages long. It addresses John Ramsey by name. It demands money, specifically $118,000, an amount eerily close to a bonus John had recently received. It warns against calling police. It instructs the family to wait for a phone call. It is written in an oddly dramatic tone, referencing foreign factions and threats that feel both theatrical and intimate. Patsy reads it and screams. She calls for John. She calls the police. From a very first moment, the instructions in the note are ignored. This detail will become crucial. Police arrive quickly. Friends are called. The house fills with people, neighbors, family, friends, officers moving through rooms. The crime scene is not secure in the way it would be today. People touch things. They clean. They comfort. They wait. JonBenét is missing. For hours, the assumption is kidnapping. The phone does not ring. Police search the house, but not thoroughly. A basement room, small, windowless, rarely used, is overlooked. Later that afternoon, John Ramsey goes downstairs with a family friend. He opens the door to that room. JonBenét's body is inside. She is lying on the floor. Her wrists are bound. A cord is wrapped around her neck. She has suffered a severe head injury. She's already dead. In an instant, the story transforms. There has been no kidnapping. There has been no escape. Whatever happened occurred inside the house. And from this moment on, the case will never move cleanly forward again. The house becomes a place of contradiction. Evidence exists, but it is contaminated. The ransom note is long, but its authorship is disputed. The injuries suggest both sudden violence and prolonged staging. The timeline fractures under scrutiny. Police do not immediately treat the Ramseys as suspects, but suspicion grows quickly, fueled by inconsistencies, media attention, and the sheer implausibility of an intruder leaving such a strange note and killing a child inside the home. The case unfolds in public. Television trucks arrive. Headlines harden. The Ramseys retreat behind lawyers and public statements. The investigation becomes tangled in mistakes, delays, and mistrust. And as the year turns from 1996 into 1997, the country becomes obsessed with one question. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? Was it an intruder who vanished into the night? Was it someone inside the house? Or was the truth lost forever in the chaos of that first morning? This is not just a story about a crime. It is a story about a moment frozen in time. A quiet house at the edge of a new year, where certainty collapsed, and every explanation that followed seemed to make things worse instead of clearer. And once that house filled with voices, it never truly became quiet again. The Ramsey family did not arrive in Boulder by accident. They came with intention, with ambition, with the quiet confidence of people who believed they were building something stable and lasting. John Ramsey had already lived several lives by the time he settled there. He had been married before, had lost a daughter in a car accident years earlier, and had rebuilt himself professionally through discipline and control. His company, Access Graphics, was thriving. Money was not a problem. Structure was. John believed in order. He believed in schedules, in planning, in managing risk. When problems arose, he expected solutions to follow. This approach served him well in business, but at home, it created a subtle imbalance. He was often absent, often traveling, often focused on forward momentum rather than emotional maintenance. Patsy Ramsey filled that space differently. Where John was restrained, Patsy was expressive. Where John sought control, Patsy sought meaning. She had survived ovarian cancer years earlier, an experience that left her deeply aware of fragility and time. After her recovery, life became something to celebrate actively. Holidays mattered. Appearances mattered. Memory-making mattered. Christmas especially mattered. The Ramsey house reflected this blend of personalities. It was large, multi-level, full of rooms that served different purposes. Bedrooms upstairs. A kitchen and living space that invited gathering. A basement that felt more like an afterthought. Storage, utility, a place not often visited. It was not a cozy house in the traditional sense. It was busy, layered, easy to get lost in. JonBenét moved through this space as both child and symbol. She was loved without question. She was also curated. Patsy poured herself into JonBenét's pageant life with the same intensity she applied to holidays. Costumes were chosen carefully. Hair was styled meticulously. Performances were rehearsed. To JonBenét, this was normal. She went to school. She played. She laughed easily. Friends described her as friendly, sometimes shy, sometimes confident. She was not a child living in fear or distress. She was a child surrounded by attention, expectations, and routine. Burke, by contrast, lived more quietly. He was older, less publicly visible, less celebrated. He shared the house, but not the spotlight. His routines were simple. School, games, solitude. He was not treated harshly or cruelly, but he existed in a different emotional orbit. This imbalance did not mean dysfunction. It meant asymmetry, and asymmetry matters when something goes wrong. By late December 1996, the Ramseys were tired. The holidays had been busy. Patsy had decorated extensively. The house was full of lights, garlands, ornaments. There had been parties. There had been travel. There were plans to leave early on the 26th for Michigan, then onward for New Year's celebrations. Christmas Day itself passed without incident. The family attended a dinner with friends. JonBenét fell asleep in the car on the way home. John carried her upstairs. Patsy changed her clothes. Burke went to bed. The house quieted. Later, Patsy stayed up. She packed. She tidied. She thought ahead. She did not change clothes before going to sleep, a detail that would later become disproportionately important. Sometime during the night, the structure of the Ramsey household collapsed. But the collapse was not loud. It did not announce itself with broken glass or screams heard by neighbors. It left no clear timestamp. It produced no witnesses. What it left behind instead was ambiguity, the most corrosive kind of evidence. When Patsy came downstairs early the next morning, she was not expecting danger. She was expecting to continue a schedule, prepare for a flight, wake children, move forward. The note on the staircase disrupted that expectation immediately. It was placed where she would see it, 3 pages long, written on paper from inside the house, using a pen from inside the house. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. The language was strange. The note claimed responsibility by a foreign faction, demanded $118,000, and warned the Ramseys not to contact police. It was theatrical, oddly personal, full of contradictions. It addressed John directly. It referenced his business. It threatened JonBenét's life, a life that, unbeknownst to Patsy at that moment, had already ended. Patsy did not read the note quietly. She screamed. She called for John. She called 911. In doing so, she violated the instructions immediately. This moment, the decision to call police, is often framed later as either innocent panic or conscious defiance. In reality, it was likely neither. It was reflex, the kind of reflex that comes from not believing, truly believing, that the note represented reality. Police arrived quickly. So did friends. The house filled with people. And from that moment on, whatever chance there was of preserving clarity vanished. Officers did not treat the house as a sealed crime scene. People moved freely. Surfaces were touched. Rooms were entered and exited. Comfort took precedence over containment. This was 1996, before modern protocols had hardened. It was also a case that did not yet feel like homicide. For hours, the family waited for a phone call that never came. The police searched parts of the house, but not all of it. The basement was glanced at, not examined. A small room, later called the wine cellar, was overlooked. It was dark. It did not appear relevant to a kidnapping scenario. Time passed. John Ramsey, restless and anxious, was eventually asked to search the house again, this time more thoroughly. He went to the basement. He opened the door to the small room. JonBenét was inside. Her body lay on the floor. Her wrists were bound. A cord was tied around her neck, attached to a broken paintbrush handle. There was tape over her mouth. She had suffered a severe head injury. Jean carried her upstairs. In doing so, he destroyed what little uncontaminated evidence remained. But in that moment, he was not a CEO or a suspect or a figure in a future media storm. He was a father who had found his child. The scene changed instantly. What had been a kidnapping became a homicide. What had been uncertainty hardened into suspicion. And the house at 749 15th Street became something else entirely. Not a home, but a problem no one could solve cleanly. The ransom note no longer made sense. The timeline fractured. Questions multiplied faster than answers. From this point forward, every detail would be argued, every action reinterpreted, every silence scrutinized. But the damage had already been done. The case would never have a clean beginning. And without a clean beginning, it would never have a clean end. Once JonBenét's body was carried upstairs, the house stopped being a potential crime scene and became something far more complicated, a place already altered by grief, movement, and shock. From an investigative standpoint, the damage was irreversible. From a human standpoint, it was inevitable. Police cleared the house slowly, awkwardly. Officers were not prepared for a homicide involving a wealthy, well-connected family in a quiet college town. They had arrived expecting a kidnapping. What they now faced was a dead child, a bizarre ransom note, and parents who oscillated between cooperation and collapse. The decision-making that followed would haunt the case forever. JonBenét's body was moved again. Evidence was disturbed. Fibers that might have told a clear story were transferred, lost, or rendered meaningless. The basement room, where she had been found, was no longer frozen in time. It had become part of the chaos. The ransom note, instead of being immediately isolated and treated as critical evidence, was handled repeatedly. People read it, discussed it, tried to interpret it aloud. Its strangeness drew attention away from procedure and toward speculation almost instantly. 3 pages was unheard of. Kidnapping notes were usually short, functional, written to minimize risk. This one was long, theatrical, and oddly intimate. It referenced movies. It referenced John's business success. It spoke with confidence, even arrogance. It read less like a demand and more like a performance. From the beginning, the note created a split among investigators. Some believed it pointed outward, toward an intruder who knew the family, who had spent time in the house, who felt comfortable enough to write extensively without fear of being discovered. Others believed it pointed inward, toward someone staging a kidnapping after something had already gone wrong. The problem was that both interpretations could fit, and because the scene itself had been compromised, the note took on too much weight. It became a centerpiece instead of one element among many. Police interviewed John and Patsy separately later that day. Both were grieving. Both were exhausted. Both were inconsistent in small ways, not because of deception necessarily, but because trauma fractures memory. Times blurred, details shifted, emotional emphasis replaced precision. Instead of isolating the family immediately, police allowed them to leave the house. Friends gathered around them. Lawyers were contacted quickly, a move that would later be framed as suspicious but was, in reality, predictable given John's background and the speed at which the situation was escalating. By the end of the first day, the case was already split into camps. Inside the police department, there was frustration. Officers felt they had lost control of the narrative. Outside, the media sensed blood in the water. This was not just a crime, it was a spectacle, a child beauty queen, a wealthy family, a ransom note that made no sense, a murder inside a perfect home. Television trucks returned the next day, then the next. JonBenét's face was everywhere. Pageant photos were replayed endlessly. Her image became inseparable from the crime itself. The way she had been dressed, styled, and presented in competitions became part of the conversation, as if it explained something, as if it could justify curiosity. The Ramseys watched their private grief become public property. Police began to feel pressure, not just to solve the case, but to appear decisive. And decisiveness, in the absence of clean evidence, often leads to narrowing focus too quickly. Attention turned inward. The idea of an intruder grew less popular among some investigators. The note was written on materials from inside the house. No clear signs of forced entry were found. The family's behavior did not align neatly with expectations of panic-stricken parents. But expectations are dangerous tools. People do not behave correctly under trauma. They behave inconsistently, irrationally, defensively. The Ramseys were wealthy, educated, and accustomed to control. Losing that control in public was not something they were prepared for. As police scrutiny increased, cooperation became more guarded. Interviews were delayed. Lawyers intervened. Communication slowed. To investigators, this felt obstructive. To the Ramseys, it felt necessary. Trust eroded on both sides. Meanwhile, forensic analysis began yielding results that confused rather than clarified. Fibers found on JonBenét's body matched clothing worn by Patsy, but this was not definitive. In a family home, cross-contamination is common. DNA evidence was partial, mixed, inconclusive. It suggested the presence of an unknown male profile, but not with enough certainty to exclude anyone else. Instead of narrowing possibilities, the evidence widened them. Every piece of data could be interpreted in multiple ways. The head injury raised questions about timing. Medical experts debated whether JonBenet had been struck first or strangled first. The nature of the garrote-like device complicated matters further. It appeared deliberate, constructed, staged, but staging by whom and why? Some investigators began to believe the scene had been arranged to mislead. Others argued that it was too elaborate, too risky, too strange to be improvised by someone under pressure. Again, both interpretations could fit. As weeks passed, the case slipped further out of alignment. Instead of converging toward an answer, it branched endlessly. Every new detail spawned theories. Every theory attracted supporters. The lack of resolution became its own story. Public opinion hardened quickly. The Ramseys were no longer just grieving parents. They were suspects in the court of public perception. Their interviews were dissected. Their body language analyzed. Their statements compared frame by frame. The ransom note was rewritten, reenacted, profiled. John and Patsy, meanwhile, withdrew. They stopped giving casual interviews. They communicated through attorneys. They insisted on their innocence. They asked for the intruder theory to be taken seriously. This insistence only deepened suspicion for some. The Boulder Police Department faced criticism for early mistakes. Evidence handling, scene control, delays, internal disagreements. The case became not just about a murdered child, but about institutional failure. And at the center of it all was the house, a place that could no longer speak clearly. By the time the year turned fully into 1997, the JonBenét Ramsey case had already become something it would never escape. a mystery shaped as much by what went wrong afterward as by what happened that night. The truth, whatever it was, had been buried beneath fear, error, interpretation, and noise. And from this point forward, the case would not be about finding a single answer. It would be about surviving the absence of one. As the months pass, and then years, the JonBenét Ramsey case hardens into a shape that is strangely familiar to anyone who studies unsolved crimes. It becomes less about discovery and more about alignment. People do not ask what happened so much as they decide what they believe happened and then arrange the facts accordingly. Two broad explanations dominate from early on, and they exist in constant tension. Either someone from outside the house entered, committed the crime, and left without being identified, or someone inside the house was responsible, and the scene was staged afterward. Both explanations are supported by evidence. Both are undermined by it. The intruder theory rests first on the ransom note itself. It is difficult to overstate how strange that document remains, even decades later. 3 pages is not just unusual, it is reckless. Writing it would have taken time. Time spent inside a house where the writer risked discovery at any moment. The note's tone shifts repeatedly. It is threatening, then almost playful, then oddly respectful toward John. It references action movies, uses specific phrasing, and demands a sum of money that suggests inside knowledge of John's finances. Supporters of the intruder theory argue that this is precisely why it must have been written by someone outside the family. The note does not read like something written in a moment of panic. It reads like something written by someone who felt comfortable, who believed they had control of the situation. There is also the DNA. Small amounts of unidentified male DNA were found on JonBenét's clothing. Over the years, advances in testing have strengthened the argument that this DNA does not belong to anyone in the Ramsey family. To those who support the intruder theory, this is the most compelling detail. It suggests the presence of someone else, someone unknown, someone who left no other clear trace. But the DNA is partial, mixed, contaminated by the very nature of the scene. It cannot, on its own, reconstruct events. It can only suggest possibility. The intruder theory also points to potential points of entry. A broken window in the basement, doors that may not have been fully secured. The size of the house itself, with its many rooms and levels, making it possible for someone to move unnoticed. Yet every one of these points raises new questions. If an intruder entered, why linger long enough to write such a long note? Why kill the child inside the house instead of taking her, as the note implies? Why leave the body behind, hidden but not removed? And why choose a method of staging so elaborate that it only draws more attention? The family theory, on the other hand, focuses on proximity and probability. Crimes against children most often involve someone known to them. The absence of clear forced entry suggests familiarity. The ransom note, written with household materials, suggests access. The staging, bindings, tape, the constructed garrote, suggests a desire to mislead rather than a straightforward act. Those who support this theory argue that something went wrong inside the house that night. An accident, a moment of rage, a loss of control, and that what followed was an attempt to reframe that event as something else. But this theory fractures almost immediately into sub-theories, each with its own problems. Was John responsible? He is often portrayed as distant, controlled, capable of compartmentalization. But there is no evidence of a history of violence, and no clear motive that fits the brutality of crime. Was Patsy responsible? Her handwriting has been compared endlessly to the ransom note, with experts disagreeing dramatically. Some say she could not be ruled out. Others say the similarities are superficial. Those who suspect her often frame the act as accidental, a disciplinary moment gone too far, followed by panic-driven staging. But this requires accepting that a mother would then participate in a prolonged deception involving extreme measures. Was Burke involved? This theory is the most controversial and the most emotionally charged. It suggests that a childhood conflict escalated, resulting in injury, and that the adults then intervened to protect their son. Supporters of this idea point to Burke's proximity, his behavior in interviews, and certain forensic details. Critics point out that it requires extraordinary assumptions about parental behavior and a lack of direct evidence. What unites all family-based theories is their dependence on speculation filling gaps where evidence should be. They explain some aspects well and fail badly at others. And that is the central problem of the case. Every theory explains something. No theory explains everything. The ransom note remains the axis around which everything spins. Handwriting analysts disagree. Linguists point out phrases that echo Patsy's speech patterns, then immediately caution against overinterpretation. The note's length, its tone, its references, all of it resists being pinned down. Some experts argue the note was written before the crime, others after. Some believe it was meant to misdirect police. Others believe it was a genuine attempt at ransom that failed. There is no consensus. The physical evidence tells a similarly fractured story. The head injury was severe, likely rendering JonBenét unconscious. The strangulation occurred later. This sequence suggests time. Time for thought, time for decision-making. But whose time? And why use such a method at all? The garrote-like device is often cited as evidence of staging because it appears sophisticated, deliberate, but it is also clumsy, improvised from household items. It does not fit cleanly into the profile of either a practiced offender or a panicked parent. The more closely the evidence is examined, the less it behaves. Over the years, official positions shift. A grand jury votes to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges related to child abuse resulting in death, but the indictment is not pursued by the district attorney, who cites insufficient evidence for conviction. The public learns of this years later, adding another layer of confusion. DNA testing continues. Some developments strengthen the intruder argument. Others are inconclusive. No arrest is made. The Ramseys maintain their innocence until Patsy's death in 2006. John continues to speak publicly, insisting that the case remains unsolved and that an intruder is responsible. Meanwhile, JonBenét's name becomes cultural shorthand. She appears in documentaries, books, television specials. Her image freezes in time. The pageant smile, the crown, the stage lights, disconnected from the reality of her ordinary life. The case becomes less about a child and more about uncertainty itself. And that may be why it endures, because it does not offer closure. It does not allow moral clarity. It does not permit the listener to feel satisfied. Every path ends in contradiction. Every answer raises another question. The evidence does not converge. It disperses. The JonBenét Ramsey case exists in a permanent state of almost solved, almost explained, almost resolved. And in that almost, it joins a small group of crimes that resist resolution, not because the truth is unknowable, but because it was damaged at the moment it mattered most. The night passed, the house filled with people, evidence moved, assumptions hardened, and from that point forward, the truth became something that had to fight its way through noise, interpretation, and belief. Whether the answer lies outside the house or within it, one thing is certain. The window in which it could have been known clearly closed very early. And once closed, it never reopened. As the years pass, the JonBenét Ramsey case does not move forward so much as it settles into place. It becomes part of the cultural landscape, resurfacing periodically with new documentaries, new experts, new confidence, and no new answers. Time does not clarify it. Time only changes the way people talk about it. In the late 1990s, Boulder becomes synonymous with the case. The police department is criticized nationally. Investigative errors are dissected in hindsight. Decisions made under pressure are reinterpreted as failures of imagination or courage. Officers rotate out. Leadership changes. The case remains. The Ramseys leave Colorado. They live under a cloud that never fully lifts. Every public appearance is scrutinized. Every interview parsed. Their grief becomes something people argue over rather than something people respect. When Patsy Ramsey dies of cancer in 2006, some feel a sense of finality. Others feel only frustration. One of the central voices of the case is gone, and with her, whatever private knowledge she carried. John Ramsey remains. He continues to advocate for renewed investigation. He supports DNA testing. He insists that an intruder is responsible. Over time, some official positions soften. In 2008, a district attorney publicly apologizes to the Ramsey family, citing DNA evidence that suggests the involvement of an unknown individual. For a moment, it feels like the case may finally tip in one direction, but it does not. The DNA, while suggestive, is still incomplete. It cannot reconstruct the sequence of events. It cannot explain the ransom note. It cannot account for the staging. It introduces possibility without delivering certainty. And so the case returns to its familiar state, unresolved, contested, suspended between explanations. JonBenét's image continues to circulate. Her face appears in thumbnails, headlines, anniversary pieces. She becomes an icon of lost innocence, of media excess, of investigative failure. But the real child, the 6-year-old who liked playing with friends, who fell asleep in the car on Christmas night, fades behind the mythology. This is the quiet tragedy that lingers beneath the louder one. The case teaches an uncomfortable lesson about truth. Not that truth is unknowable, but that it is fragile. It depends on timing, on restraint, on decisions made when pressure is highest. When those decisions fail, truth does not disappear, it fractures. The JonBenét Ramsey case fractured early. By the time the house filled with people, by the time the body was moved, by the time assumptions hardened, the story had already slipped beyond clean recovery. What remained were fragments, enough to argue with, not enough to conclude. Some listeners come away convinced of one explanation. Others remain undecided, and some, after years of revisiting the evidence, stop trying to solve it at all. They accept that the case may never resolve in a way that feels complete. That acceptance is not defeat. It is recognition. Recognition that some mysteries persist, not because they are dramatic, but because they are human, because they unfold in moments of confusion, because they are shaped by fear, grief, error, and the limits of perception. The house at 749 15th Street no longer belongs to the Ramseys. Families have lived there since. Children have slept in those rooms. Life has moved forward. The address no longer carries the weight it once did, except in memory. But every December, as the year draws to a close, the case resurfaces. A reminder of a night when the future narrowed suddenly and a child did not wake up. There is no final revelation here. No hidden document that changes everything. No single sentence that resolves the contradictions. There's only the quiet fact that a life ended, and the truth surrounding that ending became tangled in ways that could not be undone. And perhaps that is why the story remains. Not because it promises answers, but because it asks us to sit with uncertainty, to acknowledge that sometimes, even with all the evidence laid out, the most honest conclusion is silence. The silence of a house after the lights go out. The silence between years. And the silence left behind when a question is asked again and again and never fully answered.